Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Friday the 13th through spooky February 2026. So, yeah. We'll scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart to see if anything has changed. Some of the thumbnails for like Apex Legends have changed, but I don't know if too much has changed otherwise. It seems like Deadlock may now just be labeled Deadlock. That may have been the case for a long time now, but it might have been that this was just labeled as a secret game. Yeah, it definitely was labeled as a secret game for a while. Mugenics is in the 17th spot, so it has jumped up very quickly. It will be interesting to see how long the game stays, though, because inherently, even when you do have a fairly large success, which I would say making it into the top 20 qualifies for a fairly large success, the mini games only last 3 or 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks before people get tired of them and stop playing them for one reason or another, which does start to show the divide between like pre-ordering and hype and long-lasting satisfaction for a game. Schedule 1 is about to fall out of the top 100 at this rate. So to do a little bit of warm-up here, what have I been doing? A little less taxes than I probably should have, but I have been doing some of that. I am waiting for the patch jobs I did for the holes that I put in the space heater that I'm in the process of installing in one of my bathrooms. When you put the plaster patch things, I think, or if I remember the instructions correctly, instead of going back and rereading them, you're supposed to wait like 24 hours after the first application, and then I think you're supposed to sand it down and do a second application. And particularly since this is on the roof, there is going to be a little bit more of a different experience in that way. So while I'm waiting for the grout, or whatever it's called, the putty, to dry, I decided to work on a 20 amp plug in my kitchen that short-circuited and nearly started the house on fire. I can now see, once I had taken the thing out. The problem is my house is so old it has aluminum wires. Aluminum wires in particular expand and contract more when they get hot versus copper wire. Copper wire really isn't the only way to go. Solid core copper wire for house electrical. And yeah, honestly, these days you probably should go one up if money is no object on everything. Or in the case of gauges, go one down, because the gauge system is upside down like that. But my general meaning is, if you're using the regular white Romex copper wire that has a white sheath around it, maybe you should just run all of your runs with yellow, which is a little bit stronger, or a little bit better. But then also you're probably overkilling if you're doing that and just wasting money, because inherently you kind of want your house to burn down after 120 years or so. Like, at that point, it's just going to have so many problems just to things decaying over time that you just don't have materials that stay inert and permanent for thousands of years, short of building a cave. So yeah, there is such a thing as overkill. Now, there is a great argument between like the German style of building houses, which are houses that really only need major remodels at the 100, 120, 150 year mark, whereas in the United States it's just so much cheaper to build with lumber instead of stone. Well, in Germany it's stone houses, and those houses, the lumber houses, are closer to 75 to 100 years before you just need a major remodel. Anyways, so yeah, my electrical wiring's kind of a nightmare. It's got aluminum wiring in it. It's in metal boxes that are really small by modern standards, and that is another thing I would say if you are building a brand new house or even doing any kind of remodeling. Instead of having a one gang, which is a regular width outlet for just one plug outlet with two plugs on it usually, just have a two gang box always. They have faceplates to put one plug in the middle there. They're a little bit more exotic, but you can definitely get them, and there's plenty of ways to just leave room for expansion, but mostly what you're doing is you're leaving yourself room for cords and wires, which the tiny metal boxes that I have now have no room for wires, particularly if you're putting in a ground fault circuit interrupter, GFCI plug, which is what I'm putting into to replace this plug because it's in the kitchen, and new code and common sense does, let's look at the most wishlisted games now, does really point you to wanting to have at least one GFCI plug at the beginning of every circuit in the kitchen. Realistically, these days it feels more like you're just putting GFCI plugs on every single outlet, so it's easy to see. But yeah, that is a little bit more expensive, and it takes a lot more space in the box. So I had to rip out this metal box that was nailed in just with pliers, manipulating the nails out of the wood, put in a special extra deep box, which in my case the box I had on hand really wasn't designed to be installed the way I installed it, so I just put a screw in the side, which is kind of dangerous, but I put the screw in a place where it's not likely going to touch any of the screws of the outlet. And I'm doing something that most electricians will say not to do, which is backstabbing the wires into the plug to save even more space. Which backstabbing the wires, unless you have the absolute newest of plugs that are more spring wagyu style backstabs, is pretty bad because the wires tend not to get torqued down enough and locked in, and they tend to fall out. And so I did all of that, and because it's a GFCI, where you put the wires matters a lot more. There's a top and a bottom connection, and I put it in upside down. And yeah, so I'm gonna have to go back in there and change all of that. Unfortunately, I'm also gonna have to go to the bathroom immediately here, so let's pause this recording and then we'll start up again in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So, one of the things, though, that looking at the 7-day gain of the most wishlisted games is not going to really show, though, is the fact that amongst all of the announcements that happened over the past couple of days, the remastered version of Diablo 2 has been released on Steam with a weird new expansion 25 years later. Weirdly, though, no resurrected version is what they call it of Diablo 1 exists on Steam. So, while I would love to go back and play Diablo 2 and see this new content, which is not an amazing amount of an expansion pack compared to Lord of Destruction, the previous expansion pack from probably 25 years ago, there's something new there. And it's more interesting, I think, to play Diablo 2 than it is to play Diablo 4 with its changes that have happened. But yeah, storyline-wise, it's not like you get a real recap of the events of Diablo 1. So, if I was going to really try and cover it, I potentially would have to pull out, well, I'd have to get Diablo 1 from Battle.net, more than likely, and then play the Steam version, which also requires a Battle.net account anyways. That was the thing I thought that would happen pretty much day one with Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard, is that you would see Battle.net become de-emphasized and you would see all the Blizzard and Activision games released, the older games released on Steam, and it just really hasn't happened. Here we can see that there are several games coming out that are getting announced. So it definitely feels like we are in a time of announcements. Certainly. But yeah. We will see if we aren't also potentially in a time of actual games coming out every now and then too. This Silent Hill Townfall. Yeah. A lot of these presentations, like the Silent Hill transmission, was just a lot of people talking to the camera. Very Japanese in style, as far as just people talking to the camera, describing the game more than having anything to show. Stern has put out their Pokemon pinball game starting at $7,000 for the basic model. Of course, if you're buying the pinball game to then play it, put it in an arcade or a bar, $7,000 is probably fairly recoupable in a few years. If you're buying it to have it in pristine condition for your home collection, $7,000 is too expensive, and Stern pinball games have been just getting more and more expensive, and that is to start at $7,000, where maybe 10 years ago a premium model for a Stern pinball table topped out at $4,000 or $5,000. The best model with all the extra stuff, and the difference between a base model and a premium model have also been expanded by a lot of the few pinball developers that exist now. I think we're back to having 3 pinball developers around the world, whereas I think it may have gone down to as little as 1 at one point. But yeah, it used to be like a premium edition would just have slightly different art on the sides, and the backboard might have different art, or and then it expanded to maybe there was some extra LED lighting added to premium editions, or you got an extra topper that went on top of the back scoreboard of a pinball table, something that you could add later. to the point now where some pinball tables, when you get the premium edition, have entirely extra mechanical elements on the playfield, and it's just a completely different game with potentially slightly different code, which code in pinball machines has still been kind of a nightmare as far as it not ever really being finished by the time the machine comes out. So I hope we can show off the Pokemon pinball table, because it is a fairly nice looking table, but it does seem to be a fairly basic layout, although for Pokemon that kind of makes sense. You don't want something super experimental or convoluted when you are expecting a bunch of little kids to play it. It does definitely feel like it is leaning towards older fans of Pokemon. A lot of Squirtle Squad and Pikachu, Raichu type Pokemon. So I think Raichu may be second or third generation. So it isn't strictly just first generation, but it is definitely not Lugia or any of the Mega Evolutions Pokemon that are pushed more these days. There's a Meowth in the middle of it, so you would assume there might be some level of Team Rocket showing up in the different missions in the game. It feels like it's a double out lane standard layout with some drop down targets in the middle that fall down to reveal a straight up the middle shot for your special shots, which, yeah, the exactly straight up the middle shots are the ones that tend to cause you to lose quite a bit too, as far as the ball draining down the exact center of the pinball table, not hitting anything on the way down to let it reach the point where you could hit it with the flippers. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a central peg for the game, and certainly you could add a central peg to almost any pinball table if you wanted to, but those types of mods tend not to happen, unless, yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen anybody mod a pinball table just because they thought it was too difficult, because inherently the people that have pinball tables and can afford to mod them are also very good at playing pinball. And then inherently in the fandom of pinball, very much to contrast video games, if we bring back to video games, it is a fairly big split between kids that just want to hit the flippers and smash the buttons and see how far they can go, and then people who can actually play with ball control and actually finish missions and get multi-balls and squeeze out high scores. And I would say there's a pretty wide gap between the two, because it definitely is a skill that is unique and would take a lot of time for people to play and get good at pinball. And it is increasingly difficult to find pinball tables around the world. There's an app for Android, at least, called PinMap that lets you find them on a map, as far as just like there's a place with a pinball table, allegedly. Doesn't mean that the pinball table is actually going to be in good working condition when you get there, though, or even there. But yeah, I imagine we'll see some articles about the Pokemon pinball table. And let's see, is there anything else that I know of off the top of my head? I saw that there was one more game that was trying to release on Steam that Valve allegedly has just gone completely radio silent on, which weirdly it doesn't even feel like the game is an adult game, but who knows, there might be one scene in it. It feels like it's more of just a horror game with more of a Japanese aesthetic, but yeah. Who knows what's going on there. It seems like these stories do pop up, but they pop up fairly infrequently, and we're not seeing any sweeping action, at least, which is cold comfort, really, to say they're picking off game developers one by one and just making examples out of one person to scare many other developers into compliance. I watched the pretty much brand new retrospective on X-Play and G4, and yeah, in 2026, looking at G4 and X-Play and just seeing how that edgelord teenager style really wouldn't work too well, it's kind of no surprise that the reboot of G4 and X-Play failed. It's kind of no surprise that X-Play and G4 in general just would not work in modern times and just have no place. Inherently, had X-Play been on YouTube instead of a cable channel that you basically could only get if you had Dish TV, they may have stayed around a lot longer. I mean, in a lot of ways, they came from and started from GameSpot, and so GameSpot definitely has stayed around a lot longer and eventually led to Giant Bomb, but even Giant Bomb now has been irrelevant for years, and I just don't think ever going to be a big central touchstone that isn't just some kind of YouTube channel that talks about video games. And one of the things that perhaps content creators like me could learn from G4 in general, not just X-Play, is that there were several shows that were just about trying to show cutscenes, and yeah, you probably couldn't get away with that on YouTube, but it would be a different kind of information you can hand out instead of just doing reviews, whereas X-Play did reviews and stupid skits. Yeah, there is definitely an argument that X-Play in particular might be one of the pinnacle examples of like Western video game critics hating on Eastern games, JRPG games, because they definitely were just not getting the payola, the bribes, that the influence and the attention from the Japanese game developers as much as GameSpot and X-Play and Giant Bomb were getting attention, becoming friendly, overly friendly with the Western developers. But yeah, it was an interesting review just to perhaps recontextualize and realize that nostalgia for something like that is much bigger than what it actually would have ever been if it was still around, or if it tried to reboot. But yeah, I think in general the idea of having multiple people reviewing a game or writing reviews and having one person read the reviews, which is what happened a lot with X-Play, or having multiple people sit around like in Giant Bomb talking about games, is a dying concept because it just doesn't really make that much sense. People want to get one person's opinion, not a group of people's opinion, particularly when that group of people is potentially constantly changing. As we look at the mobile things quickly, Pokemon TCG Pocket has an event going on right now that I'm pretty well caught up with, and Memento Mori has an event going on right now that I'm pretty much caught up with. So I'm doing the dailies and then running out of things to do. I definitely feel like I am on the better side of having more free time by only playing 2 mobile games, but also there are points where I am spending way too much time like shopping online instead, when really shouldn't be doing that. And so having a third game take up more of my time would be nice, but if I was just making footage for my YouTube channel, that's where I'd be putting that time. But I'm putting all that on hold until at least until I finish getting my taxes done. Yeah, in general, I'm still trying to clean and declutter my house and trying to put more effort into that. But yeah, mobile games aren't doing anything too exciting at the moment. Yeah, don't really have anything to say about hardware. Again, haven't played any games recently. Valve Steam Decks are completely out of stock, not only the refurbs, but if we scroll way down here, you can find a link to regular Steam Decks, which are also completely out of stock. All of them. Not only the LCD, but the OLED for 512 and the 1TB OLED are all out of stock in the United States, at least, when assumes they cannot get the parts cheap enough and the tariffs are causing a bit of a problem there. Which, for all the talk of tariffs, I honestly have seen a lot more shortages than I've seen prices going up really high. So yeah, that is a lot to do with the tariffs being talked about and then being implemented for like a week and then not implemented for a week, and then lawsuits happening putting tariffs potentially on pause. So yeah, there's been less tariff stuff directly affecting prices as much as just it causing shortages. That being said, the RAM apocalypse is almost certainly not really related to tariffs much at all. It is much more related to the AI bubble. But because of the RAM apocalypse, it is just questionable how many units, if any, actually are going to come out for the Steam machine or the Steam frame or even the Steam controller. And so, yeah, we kind of don't know what is going on as far as all of that. As far as Steam machines are concerned. Here we can see Mugenics is in the #1 spot for games being played on the Steam Deck. Just jumped right to the top, bringing with it the Binding of Isaac Rebirth up to the 9th spot. Probably pulling Cult of the Lamb up a little bit too. And maybe even Brotato. Those are all fairly similar games. Here you can also see Diablo 2 Resurrected Infernal Edition, which we should look at which is probably pulling Diablo 4, which I definitely could see playing Diablo 2 on the Steam Deck, assuming the control inputs work fine. Like Diablo 2, definitely a mouse first game originally. Well, pretty much the only way you could play it was with a mouse. Whereas I imagine Diablo 4 might have better controller support. Yeah. I still wonder if you could make a game like Diablo 2 in the Godot engine relatively easily these days, but I don't think it would be easy. I think it would be doable. Star Sand Island is out new in the 64th spot, also on the Steam Deck being played. Which, yeah, these do seem to echo the games that would be played in general. I'm gonna come to just the main page on Steam. Yep. So Diablo 2 Resurrected Edition is Diablo 2 with an extra bit of an expansion. And yeah, you can see in the user interface that there's stuff that you would kind of try to reduce in modern times. You would have smaller health and mana vials. You'd probably put them in the corners. You wouldn't have buttons associated with 4 item usage slots, 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the keyboard. You wouldn't have a bunch of filters. That is some of the stuff that the Resurrected Edition also, I think, or Diablo 4 maybe, is working on, is just item filters. So you can move faster and just not even pick up certain levels of items. But yeah, when Diablo 2 first came out, this kind of user interface was almost necessary to take up more of the resolution of the screen, whereas modern games that would not really be acceptable. There's also a severely high level of darkness in a lot of these screenshots. Yeah. The procedural generation of the dungeons in Diablo 2 would be, in particular, the difficult thing to program, even if you were making a modern version of a game like this. I'm surprised they never tried to make something like this that was angels instead of fighting against demons. I mean, inherently you are the good guys fighting against demons. There are angels in Diablo 2, and you are, for the most part, I think, always fighting on the side of the angels. But I could see some kind of Christian group, if they were ever actually capable of making a good video game, trying to make something like this where you were saving people and not just seeing a bunch of demonic imagery, even if you are defeating the demonic imagery. I think with the newest expansion, this is the entirety of the different character classes you can have, which honestly seems like a lot. I think in the original Diablo 2 you probably had just like 4 character classes. Maybe you got 2 more in the Lord of Destruction expansion, and maybe you're getting 2 more, I think, for this new expansion. Yeah, you have a very classic interface as far as items you can collect and items you can attach, and some games certainly have expanded on the different types of armor you can wear and items you can attach to the point where it's just way too many different categories of items, really. Yeah, this came out February 11th, so you are on Steam, and the Reign of the Warlock, I guess, is the new expansion. But yeah, there's a weirdness, certainly in my mind, that it's taken this long to get Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 and the older Blizzard games in general on Steam in any form. Yeah, and Diablo 2 might be one of these games, one of the few games that exists where people I've been pretty actively playing it since the release of the game came out. Yeah, 30 new items doesn't really sound like a lot. And 2 new character styles, which it seems like that's all you're getting, doesn't really seem too much like much of anything. Yeah, you can see filters there that the new version has. And I know in this resurrected version you can play with the old graphics, but I don't see a real reason why you would want to. There's Diablo himself, apparently summonable by the Warlock. And they've got all kinds of pets and trophies and decor items and all kinds of monetization extra things. You can see it's very positive right now, 89% of 900 user reviews, so people are very happy 2 days in. But it is also paying $40 for a 25-year-old game, and it requires a Battle.net account. There is also a chest in which you share items between different characters, and depending on what era / what expansion you choose, those chests are separated out. So if you're playing with the newest expansion, any items that you would have collected playing with the older expansions would have been a issue. Well, interestingly, this seems like these are all cross-game rewards. You get this for Diablo 4, you get this for Diablo 4, and you get this for World of Warcraft. So even the monetization there. In contrast, Diablo 4 is mixed reviewed, and people tend to be playing Path of Exile if they're playing anything. But I think Path of Exile plays fairly different from how Diablo 2 is. Diablo 2 is probably simpler, and Diablo 4 in a lot of ways I think is just trying to copy Path of Exile way too much. Yeah. And if it's just one new character class, then I guess you got 3 over the previous expansions, or maybe you start with 5. Inherently though, Diablo 1, Diablo 2 though, it would have had to have been a game you played exclusively, that you would really want to play every single character class. And that really does highlight where a more modern attempt or take on this type of game would have had you capable of swapping classes mid gameplay and re-rolling, because it is just asking way too much of a modern gamer's time to have them start at level 1 with all these characters, particularly since it's random loot drop. And the random loot drop aspect is another annoyance, certainly. That being said, Borderlands is still doing that. Yeah, you have different character classes for Borderlands 4, and the loot drops are procedurally generated and randomized. I would rather prefer, if I was making a Diablo-like game, to have more of a scripted experience where there is a consistent number of items you get and less random stuff, or the random stuff doesn't really matter that much, where like maybe everybody gets the same sword has like plus 10 attack versus plus 10 defense. But yeah, I would want a more scripted experience, a more consistent experience for everybody, where you play as all the other characters too, and you're encouraged to play as the other characters. You can do it simply by changing class. And yeah, that concept alone might lead to a gameplay mechanic. You don't see a lot of sci-fi games like this, so if it was a case where you could like transmute yourself in a sci-fi way and you were fighting aliens instead of demons, that you could make a game stand out fairly differently. But yeah, we'll leave it at that for now. Yeah, and we have Capcom publisher sale, which maybe is a thing that might get you some Resident Evil games cheap. Yeah, Resident Evil Requiem, when does that actually come out? And the PvP Fest is still going on. Yeah, like Resident Evil 2 here is $10. I suppose if I don't have that, I should get it, but I'm pretty sure I have it. Killer Inn is getting promoted by the community, which increasingly it is feeling like it is a smarter move to follow the community's suggestions than it is to look at just what's on sale. Well, let's see what's on sale. Diablo 2. No sale right now. So we now know why last stream the top seller did not include the Steam Deck. Steam Deck is just completely not available. So Eugenics is in the second spot behind Marvel Rivals, which is free, and weirdly putting Counter-Strike 2 in the third spot, which is really surprising. It feels like Resident Evil Requiem is out now. Got some popular upcoming games. This Double Dungeon looks interesting. Yeah, as much as I say, though, that the era of people sitting around the table and talking about video games is probably coming to an end, as people just want a certain person's opinion, I still very much am in the case where if I can have people play games and describe the games to me, sitting around the table describing them, that would be very helpful. Because yeah, I don't get a lot of reviews from the people I follow. And yeah, this is an interesting claymation art style. Definitely makes it stand out for what otherwise could have been a fairly generic RPG. Although I wouldn't even say it's that generic. Every screenshot here feels like it is fairly unique. But yeah, I don't... Is this Dino Crisis the old Dino Crisis? It looks like it is. It's not a... Yeah, I think this is a re-release. Dino Crisis 2 also seems to be available. Although weirdly, I'm gonna have to click on this announcement page to then get to the link of Dino Crisis 2. Yeah. Definitely there's people who have talked about Dino Crisis in the past enough that I still think it is relevant. Yeah. Resident Evil Requiem doesn't come out until the 26th, so that's just pre-orders right now. Eugenics is 94% positive with 11,942 reviews. That being said, I will, as a critic, say this might go down a little bit as far as its reviews, as people play more of it and maybe burn out on it. If I was wise, I would get this game now and start playing it just so I'm caught up with it now, before they potentially add expansions and make it even longer, which there's a decent reason to believe that will happen. Right. And then I thought I opened Resident Evil 2, but seems like it's not open. Let's see. Do I have the Mega Man Legacy Complete Pack? Let's look at this pack. Let's look at this pack. I have these games. Do I have all of these? I have way too many games and nowhere near enough time. There is question about this new Mega Man game as far as just, will it really happen? Remember Me at $3 is about the right value for that game, I would say. Lost Planet at $3 is probably the right price for that too. Some of these games are fairly relevant and fairly old. Whereas I don't know if Mega Man 11 really is worth $10. Then a lot of these fighting games are kind of impossible for me to justify until I actually start playing fighting games. I have a whole Dead Rising game series, but I'm not sure that anything other than this first game is really the one to play. I'm not even sure if the first one is really worth playing. Okami for $10 is about as good as you're gonna get it, I bet. Yeah, I don't think you really need to play any of the Bionic Commando games. Yeah, this one, I have 2 of these games, so savings for me would be about half. This one, I have 1 of these games, so the savings would be 71% still at $13. Then this game would be Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3. But then my question there would be, are you getting all of the deluxe editions of these, if there are deluxe editions, or are you paying for just the base games to then be upsold later? And certainly, instead of buying Resident Evil 2, I could just play Resident Evil 0, which I think chronologically, this remastered version of Resident Evil 1 would have been followed by Resident Evil 0, and then Resident Evil 2 and 3, and then kind of ignoring the 5, 6, 7 Village games. Yeah, Mega Man 11 and Mega Man 0 ZX Collection. Legacy Collection, is that on my wish list? Yes, it is. This looks like mobile version of a Mega Man game. Yeah, let's look at Resident Evil 2 here. Is there a deluxe edition? Yes, there is. So, if you were going to get this, you would want to get the deluxe edition, assuming the deluxe edition isn't just Resident Evil Resistance, which nobody cares about. Yeah. Then the extra DLC stuff here, I would assume is included with the deluxe edition, but who knows, there might even be more extra stuff that you would have to get. So if I was to add, like all of that to the cart, for instance, and then hit bundle and bow here, all of these are grayed out. Remember, my Violent Monkey scripts here are changing the appearance of how this looks. Otherwise this would say in cart. Alright, well, that would bring us to Video Games Chronicle, but either those articles are nowhere to be found or they're mixed together, so instead we will jump directly into Komatsu news. The Liar Prince and the Blind Prince for PC launches March 11th, currently available for the PS4 and Switch. Are those two games in the same story? The Liar Princess and the Blind Prince. Okay, I guess that's one game, I would think. But you would think that would be two games. But apparently not. I don't know if it's on Steam. Yes, it is. Came out March 11th and has no reviews. Or it is coming out March 11th, and that's why it has no reviews. Is the right way to describe it. Definitely has that kind of children's book type feel to it, fairy tale type feel to it. Kingdom Come Deliverance is now available for the PS5 and Xbox Series with 4K resolution, improved frame rates, and more. Which I don't know if those are retroactively going to be put into the Switch version, but the current version on Switch, on Steam, is pretty good looking and reviewed very positively, so may not really need any updates. Kingdom Come 2 Deliverance, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is also rated very positively. Hunt the Night for PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch launches February 26th. It's a retro style action RPG. Looks like it has a fairly different style to it. Although the thumbnails there not really depicting what the actual game looks like. You can see that this is 75% positive right now from 2023. So it is kind of borderline on the positivity, but only if I hold it to a really high standard, which I really shouldn't hold it to. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it on the wish list. Let's see. Genshin Impact version Luna 5 update Song of the Welkin Moon variation Homeward. He Who Caught the Wind launches February 25th. That is a major mouthful as a title. Certainly. Honogarashi no Niwa main trailer and latest details and screenshots introducing the village's ancient rules and things encountered late at night. This definitely seems to me like it is some kind of horror game of some sort. Yeah. But it also feels like it might just be a half farming game, and it's just amazing how many things are farming plus something else. Let's look at the trailer just to get a general idea of what it's all about. But yeah, I don't know if this really is a direct response to Stardew Valley just years later, or if it is perhaps more Animal Crossing coming back into popularity because of Nintendo, or if it is just some level of, I don't know, Harvest Moon or some other nostalgia. But it does seem like there's just way too many games that have farming as a main gameplay mechanic. Although I am fairly biased in that I will fully admit I don't really like the farming mechanic. I do complain about every game being violent, certainly, so farming is at least a mechanic that's fairly commonplace that isn't inherently that violent. At worst, you're like shooting varmints or killing rats and things like that as far as the level of violence against animals, and farming, I suppose, might be considered violent against plants to an extreme few. But yeah, I don't feel like the loop itself makes a lot of sense and makes fun overall as far as what you're doing. But in fairness, I also don't enjoy gardening or farming that much in the real world either. Having allergies makes that pretty much impossible, and it is kind of nice to grow things, but it is a lot of work for usually a minimal amount of reward. Yeah. It is an interesting art style that you're being shown here compared to this, and an interesting art style compared to the horror themes. And honestly, I think if you're going to combine farming and horror, then it, to me, feels like it should be more magical plants that you're planting to deal and interact with the yokai monsters. Apparently they're giving away stickers somehow, which is interesting how we're still seeing these kinds of product tie-in merchandise things. AI Limit DLC Aaron's Furnace of War has been announced. I don't recall AI Limit at all. Let's see. It, from the looks of it, feels like it's a fairly typical JRPG. Maybe something that feels almost like a mobile game. Yeah. Seeing a little bit too much of this too, where it's kind of nondescript areas and all the gameplay really is you're wandering around an arena attacking monsters, which that can work, but I would like more puzzles and platforming and dungeon crawling and just some hints that those elements actually exist and that it isn't just one battle after another. Honogarashi no Niwa Safe Living Mode trailer. Interesting that there's a second trailer here. So you can literally turn off the scary aspects of the game if you want to. That certainly speaks to a lack of confidence in your artistic creation and your artistic design. Moving on, the Sanrio Characters Smash Festa has been announced for Switch and PC. That is Hello Kitty and many other characters that you would have I would have a harder time actually naming. I'm starting to see more of these Sanrio characters in general having merchandise go on sale, as far as slick deal sales too. So they might be gaining in the popularity, or they might actually be going in the opposite direction in popularity and they're just trying to clear them out. I would guess this is a collection of mini games, basically. Although what's being shown here seems to be just variations on Pong. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like a simplistic game for a younger audience. Tides of Annihilation, Year of the Horse trailer is available. Again, a game I don't recognize, so I don't think it's out yet. Yeah. I don't recognize any of these visuals. It is a interesting mix mash here. You have these kind of high fantasy armor character, and then they're trying to get on the subway. They get on this subway that's celebrating the Year of the Horse. So I would expect that the whole subway aspect here is not actually in the main game. And that this is possibly another example of game developers going a little too wild and crazy to celebrate Chinese New Year, which is almost certainly the big holiday of the year that Asian countries celebrate more than Christmas or Easter, Solar New Year, regular New Year. This game is not available in my region, whatever this game is, but Tides of Annihilation is. Yeah, looking at the actual game, you're not seeing anything here that indicates anything like a subway would show up. Now that I look at these screenshots, I think I vaguely do recognize a trailer I saw doing this battle, although it doesn't really tell me much. Uncover the mystery of an otherworldly invasion in a shattered modern London, unleashing hordes of enemies as Gwendolyn fights alongside spectral knights to save your family and a piece of the broken world back together. So it is in a modern London. Interesting. There isn't really a lot of screenshots to match with that. I guess maybe like way in the background here you can see some of that. That is two weird combinations. Certainly it'll be interesting to see if they can do something creative with that weird combination, fantasy and modern London. Here we can see Dino Crisis and Dino Crisis 2 are now available via Steam. Each game is available for $4.99 for a limited time. Decent chance that they will go on sale even below that in the next couple of years. Games were previously made available via Good Old Games, so you could almost certainly assume that anything that has been fixed to run on modern computers for Good Old Games has a chance of showing up also on Steam eventually. Although there might be a few games that are going to stay loyal to Good Old Games only, or have slightly different versions for the Good Old Games version. Legacy of Kain Ascendance has been announced for modern consoles, the Switch and PC. Which, yeah, there's been a desire certainly for the Legacy of Kain series to reboot and and satisfy that cult following. We have very different kinds of animation happening there in the cutscene, and what's being shown here is a side-scrolling 2D game, which is very different from the early 3D platforming games that I believe the Legacy of Kain games were. Inherently, I think the Legacy of Kain series was one of those series that was fairly loved by its creators, but just failed to really succeed well enough to justify getting sequels or reboots or remasters until now. Speaking of failed series, one of the things I'm doing is Amazon Prime has gotten season 3 of a TV series called Sanctuary, for an old sci-fi series. I'd already watched season 1, season 2, and season 4, but for a weird reason it didn't have season 3, so I'm now catching up watching that. It's a weird series that had too little of a budget to ever really be greenlit, and so to try and adjust for the fact that they had too little of a budget, they made roughly 70% of all of their sets digitally on a green screen, which they did this so many years ago that it was ridiculous to even try that. The animation and the lighting of the characters is just terrible, and it's very obvious that most of the scenes are in green screen, probably really green screen and not even blue screen, whereas it took probably a decade or two after the Sanctuary TV series before Disney tried that again, and even now people are not really happy with Disney having some of the Star Wars TV shows shot almost entirely on green screen. And at no point do I think it actually would have been wise or cheaper to have their basic sets be green screen at all, because they're also dealing with making a Monster of a Week show, which also would have been CGI, and it would have been so much easier to have basic sets that were just sourced or built for the places that you see every week. Compare that to like Star Trek The Next Generation. You have the bridge set, you have the engineering set, you have one bedroom that you may see every now and then, you have the medical set, you have the conference room and the captain's quarters set. All of those probably cost a little bit to make, certainly, but they were something you could reuse and they would look good every week, whereas doing that digitally just makes no sense. If you're going to do anything digitally, you would have done the sets that you're only going to use once and be done with. Overall, though, the premise of the Sanctuary TV series was interesting. Characters, actors left the job, and the general premise that it starts with gets shifted by the second season, then gets shifted again by the third season, then gets shifted again by the fourth season. And it doesn't feel like they even made it to 100 episodes to be syndicated, which is really crazy. But yeah, it was just a not really thought out, probably not given a fair chance because of the being on the Sci-Fi Channel show that had ABC or CBS been funding it, it would have been a completely different experience. Yeah, it's an interesting, perhaps, contrast to like the Fallout TV series now, decades later, where pretty much all those sets in the Fallout TV series are built and just shot like regular things, and I'm not sure there's much of any CGI going on except for the monsters. The death claws are probably CGI, and maybe a few things here and there, and the credits the credits are animated to show parts of the Fallout New Vegas game for Season 2 in particular that they didn't really want to touch upon or mention, so you get this simplified credit sequence that just shows an area of New Vegas that they assumedly just walked right past. Which that would be funny, certainly, if somewhere around the third season of Fallout they realize that they have not discovered any of the locations in the Las Vegas area or the California area, and they just have to turn back around and start discovering locations again, and starting to do more side quest stuff. But that's probably not how it's going to go. More than likely it's going to be a very tight 75 episode, which is really all you need for syndication these days, type show. Back to video games though. A 2D action platformer, God of War Sons of Sparta, has been announced for PS5. It's now available. Young Kratos and Deimos discover the meaning of duty and honor. This is interesting because of a few reasons. One, it's going to be a PS5 exclusive. Two, it's a side-scrolling game. And three, this now makes this weird sandwich where they really are hoping that you don't really question whether the original God of War games happened or not, because of just the more edgelord level of violence and the sex minigames that were in the original God of War games, and just how those played. This is definitely not the button mashing, hacking, and slashing of the original God of War games. This is more strategy, more timing based. Yeah. Definitely feels like it's Castlevania influenced, which at a certain level, if Konami is not going to make any more Castlevania games, somebody else should. Somebody is going to eventually mention Sparta's treatment of young boys in the coverage of a game like this, and we'll wait and see if that happens. It does certainly also speak to the modern way of making games, that it is a that it has co-op play. It looks like the God of War trilogy remake has been announced for the PS5, so is that our next story? Yes, it is. T.C. Carlson returns as Kratos. Now, I don't think there was exclusively just 3 games for God of War. I think there was 3 God of War games that were on PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3. But I also think there were some PS Vita and PSP games. And so you would want to see those also re-released. Yeah, when we look at the remake here, I imagine there might be some censorship in the trailer, one would hope. Or that the games themselves might be censored. Regardless, it's going to show a very different type of gameplay. Puzzle platforming every now and then with a lot of hack and slashing and a heck of a lot of collecting of red and blue orbs, which that was pretty much the balance, I think, of those games, was you were collecting health orbs because your health was pretty much constantly depleting, and you were collecting blue orbs to do special attacks. it is an interesting example of where a lot of these legacy games may not be something that you're super proud of, the companies are super proud of, but people are still going to want to see them. But we are a minute into a 2-minute and 17-second announcement, and that is just this guy talking to the screen. Are we going to see any gameplay at all? What's funny is this is a green screen, more than likely, I would say, of a recording booth. So yeah, when you see announcements like this, I tend to assume it is a case that, yeah, they've got no footage to show at all, that this kind of deal just happened, and that they have no remake footage to show at all, and I question how much of a remake really is going to happen there. It might very well just be a remaster being called a remake, whereas by calling it a remake they can take out the immature stuff and try and match the tone of the more modern God of War games. Although by calling the rebooted series God of War, they already had pretty much thrown out any of the previous games. Moving on, Marvel Token Fighting Souls launches August 6th. Don't seem like we're going to have a trailer here, and honestly, should we be watching a trailer? This is all the state of play announcements that happened from Sony. So it definitely does feel like it was a good state of play as far as actually showing something useful and actually making announcements, whereas in the past some of these announcements from companies have been extremely minimal and extremely bland. Yeah. Magic is not really that well known of a character. I think outside of comic book fandom, Storm is fairly well known. Wolverine and Captain America are definitely well known. They are definitely going to have to work to bring in more female fighters as far as their level of being known. I don't think I've ever even seen this character Danger before. I do slightly question if there is any real major relevance here as far as like a modern audience, kids these days, as it were, whether they actually care about X-Men at all, despite the numerous not TV shows, but movies, and whether they actually would be willing to play a fighting game because they were slightly able to recognize those characters. Whereas definitely in the old days, Marvel vs. Capcom was something that was in arcades, and it definitely stood out amongst even the other fighting games as having a different art style. But yeah, they're promoting several characters here that I think comic book fans might not be too interested in. Star-Lord, Ms. Marvel. Doctor Doom has always been fairly popular. Captain America may not be that popular these days. But yeah. A Death Rider, Knight Rider, I forget his name, may not be really that popular, and a mecha version of Iron Man still stands out as looking different than the rest. Yeah, a big part of this, certainly, like any fighting game, is just going to be down to how it actually plays. Let's see. Saros gameplay overview trailer is available. Saros is that game that has shown us very little, and even at that, I kind of don't want to try and watch another trailer of the gameplay. It seems like a lot of this is showing a menu system. The roguelike running and gunning high action gameplay concept through what I think are procedurally generated areas. Seems like there's two variations of the world you can be in. A lot of these are going to be PlayStation 5 exclusives, which feels like a very late point to start putting out PlayStation 5 exclusives. But yeah, it might work. That would be a step backwards, though, for PC gamers, where it felt like most PlayStation 5 games were moving in the direction of releasing day and date on PC, and these games may very well release day and date, particularly the God of War remake and that new God of War side-scrolling game feel like games that would do best if they were released day and date on PC. Moving on, Big Walk has been confirmed for PS5, coming to PlayStation Plus monthly games on day one. This definitely feels like a different type of game, to say the least. Feels like it is one of a Peak style game, which I don't know if Peak was the first game like that, where it's a group of people all working together to go to a direction, but Peak is probably the most recent of this current generation of those types of games. But yeah, I don't really see anything here that's particularly interesting. Maybe there's some kinds of puzzles that people have to work together to solve, but if that is the case, then that's just a nightmare, because you'll never get people in the same place to work together to solve a puzzle. Yeah. So, yeah, I just question this premise. Yeah, you see a trailer like this and you see people cooperating and being told what to do exactly, but in the reality it's just going to be a bunch of people running around goofing off. Yeah. Although, to contrast that to a game I played relatively recently that I think is actually airing right now on my channel, Islands of Insight, that's a game that has a weird MMO aspect to it where multiple people can be in the same shared world, but the puzzles themselves are individually solved. So the only thing that really happens is you see a bunch of people wandering around, and if people happen to be standing together in one spot, then you tend to know that there is a puzzle there, or maybe there's a solution by standing in that one spot. That concept also didn't feel like it made any real sense, and to support that concept they effectively had procedurally generating ever replenishing puzzles, which just created a system where there's thousands upon thousands of puzzles that are all way too similar to each other that you could grind out. But yeah, this is definitely an online co-op game. And co-op, frankly, needs to really be thought out as far as actually getting people to cooperate. Yeah, nobody ever really points out that it can very much be a nightmare to just organize people's schedules so everybody is online playing at the same time. This is from the creators of Untitled Goose Game, and they're calling it a cooperative online walker/talker. Walker-talker. Which I don't even know what that's supposed to really mean. PlayStation Plus's game catalog and classics catalog lineup for February has been announced. Seems to be all of these games. But yeah, don't really have too much to say there. I did want this game Vinba to be more of a success, but I didn't really have any hopes that an Indian themed cooking game was going to catch people's attention. And you could probably say that for this game and this game and this game and this game too. Well, Monster Hunter Wilds maybe not, but yeah, there's definitely more of a smaller audience for these types of games compared to Spider-Man 2 or even Monster Hunter Wilds. Let's see, PlayStation Plus Classics catalogs adds Tekken Dark Resurrection in March, Time Crisis in May. Interesting. I think Time Crisis is a on-rails shooter game, so I'm almost 100% sure it is. Notice that they're also doing a new visual theming here as far as this PlayStation Plus. As far as these are not the usual colors nor the usual patterns you see for PlayStation. So with a new president, we might finally be seeing the beginnings of even a slight change in the themes and the branding of PlayStation to be maybe a little bit more solid, a little bit more basic in the color scheme, less relying heavily on white and shades of white, which that might hint that if a PlayStation 6 comes out, it's not just going to default be a big white box with ridiculous curves. Yeah, the whole artistic design of the PlayStation 5 may also be missing for the next PlayStation. Let's see, Marathon, quote, Server Slam Open Preview Weekend is set for February 26th to March 12th. Full game is due out on March 5th. Okay. I'm still pretty much uninterested in Marathon, since it's an online PvP game, but I suspect the audience is probably not really there either for Marathon. We shall see. Speaking of games that have been announced, this is an odd transition certainly, but I wanted to mention it. I talked about in the previous episode that there was fan backlash for one of the new characters in Overwatch 2. Apparently, the fan backlash is that the first time they showed her as a character was in a style that made the character look older and stand out more from the other characters. Now, it seems like the fan backlash, and maybe it's not really fans backlashing as much as it is just mainstream video game journalists backlashing. They're complaining that the second time they showed the character looked a little younger and too much like all the other characters. which, yeah, it seems like age is probably not even the main factor there. The main factor seems to be that they are just making the characters too similar. Which, yes, I can certainly agree that characters should stand out. Perhaps not stand out as much as the weird looking characters in Marathon, but there should probably be some variety going on for Overwatch and Overwatch 2 and every other game. But yeah, I think the biggest problem there is you can't change your mind. First time you show a character, that's pretty much the way they have to look. And generally when you're developing a character, you have whole like concepts that you want to visually depict based on the character and the way they look, and you have a lockdown way a character is just going to look as far as your prime sketch and your first draft of a character, and you aren't just going to drastically change them. But yes, any change in appearance, even if it is somewhat mediocre changes, irritates people. See the backlash from the way the character Alloy looks in the first Horizon game versus the way she was depicted in the second Horizon game. That was talked about way more than the actual game of Horizon Forbidden West was talked about. Moving on, a untitled John Wick game has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. It's the ultimate John Wick gaming experience. Guess that might give me an excuse to actually watch the John Wick movies, but I don't know if there really is a reason. You kind of know what it is all about. Just from a few trailers and cutscenes. They're talking about Gun Fu. There was a movie that came out like a month or so before The Matrix that had Gun Kata. Actually, that might have been the name of the movie. That was very much also like a Gun Fu type movie. And yeah, it just didn't get seen as much by people. And I would generally assume when they say Gun Fu, they just mean you're doing a bunch of Kung Fu type stuff with people who also have guns and occasionally shoot them. I know that the John Wick movies probably have run most of their course now, as far as the actor might be a little too old to really be doing them still, and they've, I think, made like 4 of them, and then they made a spin-off movie, I think that was called something like The Ballerina, and that spin-off movie didn't really work or go anywhere. I think this actor in particular is probably getting fairly old, and video game representations of him probably look better in close-up than what he actually would look like in the real world. This is the growing way in which you're going to see the same actors get cast in doing something and extend their careers, not by growing old and playing older characters, which most writers don't even write older characters these days, but instead by transitioning to roles in video games where they only have to lend their voice. And honestly, it's going to be they lend their AI voices, and so they may do the lines, and then the lines will get changed via AI to sound like the way they sounded 10-20 years ago. You look at some of the old TV shows like Dragnet, for instance. And those are fairly old looking people. A lot of it has to do more with them not having sunscreen and smoking a lot, and they are actually not that old, but they definitely look a lot older, and those types of actors just don't really get work, main lead work at least, in modern times. Let's see. Konami announced a new RPG called Rev Noir for PS5. I assume this is also doing the state of play, which, yeah, for the most part, before this point, all of the announcements seem to have been more targeting a Western audience. It is an interesting point to say, though, that the Konami does seem like they're willing to try it again and actually make a game themselves, or make a game using second-party uncredited developers instead of Konami just licensing remakes and names of games to third-party developers. Yeah, this definitely looks like a JRPG of some sort. Seems like maybe there's going to be a time reversing aspect, although maybe it isn't actually time reversing. Like, it's much easier to tell a story where you go back in time and try and do it again versus actually being able to rewind time. And that's the problem with like Life is Strange, is that they actually gave the character the ability to rewind time in a few points, and by doing that they had to create a fairly complicated new kind of gameplay mechanic that I just don't think really works. Although ironically, you can rewind time to your heart's content when running a ROM for like an NES game, but those games are definitely not designed with time rewind in mind. They just are easier to play by giving you the ability to rewind time. So yeah, looking at that trailer, it looks like a fairly generic JRPG game. It is definitely going to be how much meat is on the bones of those kinds of games as to whether an audience happens. Silent Hill Townfall launches in 2026 for PS5 and PC and has a reveal trailer. This is definitely from the Silent Hill transmission, and if I recall correctly, this is yet another game that is taking place in a not Silent Hill as far as a city called Silent Hill in the United States. I believe this is in Ireland. Yeah, no, Scotland, not Ireland. Sorry about that. And so, yeah, this is much more of a case of Konami just giving the name Silent Hill to anybody who's willing to pay the license fee. But yeah, we already have Silent Hill F. There is a real question now as far as what does it mean to be a Silent Hill game, and what does the audience want Silent Hill games to be. I think the vast majority of people want Silent Hill games to have the sexy nurses and the Pyramid Head characters and just be in one location in one setting. I don't feel like any aspect that was added to Silent Hill F was really appreciated. I doubt we would ever see any kind of sequel or game like that again. If they are going to make another Silent Hill game in the Japanese land masses, it's probably going to be completely different. It is interesting, certainly, to have a character, protagonist of dark skin. There has been traditionally problems with both Westerners and Easterners not wanting to play characters of color. So they are already going fairly bold. Same could have been true said for Silent Hill F, where you're playing as a female character. You don't run into the same problems though. Like, I just don't really feel like this character is going to be incapable of fighting back, whereas in those early announcement days of Silent Hill F, it definitely felt like a Japanese schoolgirl was just going to struggle to fight back against monsters. We are seeing monsters here, but we're not seeing anything that looks like a pyramid head, something somewhat close to it. So yeah, it does seem like there is just effectively a horror aspect of games that Konami wants to have their name attached to and use the Silent Hill name for. This is somewhat like a pyramid head type character. But also you could very easily see this just not being called Silent Hill. Yeah. It definitely doesn't feel like it's going to tie into Silent Hill. And perhaps this is a great example of where there perhaps needed to be a core conceit that was revealed in a proper sequel to Silent Hill that would explain why other cities could have become like Silent Hill. If there was some kind of magical talisman that could be brought to a city, if there was some kind of magic site ritual or spell that could be cast to make cities like Silent Hill, if there was perhaps even just a thought that entered the head of the main protagonist that made cities turn into Silent Hills, maybe that would work. But without any connecting matter here, it definitely feels like Silent Hill is just an anthology series at this point of horror games that might play somewhat similar to each other, but aren't going to play that similar to each other because they're going to be made by different developers and in different locations. Moving on, Castlevania Belmont's Curse has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Which, yeah, there is. I said that if Konami wasn't going to make a new Castlevania game, somebody else should, and here we have Castlevania games actually being made. Now, to me, it feels like 40th anniversary of Castlevania. That's a long time. Feels like to me this might be a reboot of one of the earlier Castlevania games, or a remake of the Castlevania games. It's been several years since even the Castlevania Netflix series has come and gone, which I've seen the Blu-rays for that go on sale, and I've wondered, but it's not really, I think, worth owning at the price they're selling it for. Yeah, this definitely doesn't look like this is just a remake of a previous Castlevania game. It feels like it's a little bit more modernized, obviously in the art style, but also just in the level design and how you're fighting these monsters. Castlevania in particular has a unique format where you're just fighting different kinds of monsters left and right, all in one castle. So it's not really constrained much. I wouldn't be surprised if this is even a prequel game to other Castlevania games. So yeah, that's exciting, certainly, to see a new Castlevania game. Another Konami actually announcing games and making Steam pages and putting screenshots out, so one has to assume they actually are going to release these games. Again, a lot of this is just Konami using other companies to actually make the games, which isn't the worst plan ever to get the best potential outcome. A game called Darwin's Paradox launches April 2nd. The demo is due out February 13th. This is a game that looks somewhat weird in that you're, evolving and looks like you're platforming. I know at some point here, one of the trailers showed the octopus under a box doing the whole Solid Snake hiding gimmick. Yeah. My assumption here is that this is a 2D puzzle platforming game, half on water, half on land. With this, I guess they transitioned from this trailer into the next Metal Gear Solid announcement. Yeah. As far as I know, there is no Darwin's Paradox. You could certainly label some thoughts as Darwin's Paradox, but yeah, I don't think there was anything actually called that way. And so yeah, the next news article is Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 final update is now available. Improvements to Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. But yeah, you can see the original resolution settings here look pretty low polygon and blocky, where it feels like the max resolution software here has done something to anti-alias a lot of this, make it look better, somewhat better. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. There's Darwin's Paradox. We've already seen it. And then Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2 has been announced for modern consoles, the Switch and the PC. Which this would be Metal Gear Solid 4 and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker and Metal Gear Ghost Babel, with a bunch of digital contents also. So this is a announcement that is a welcome announcement, because it does show that Konami is willing to do at least some level of releasing the old Metal Gear games to make sure that they're somewhat playable in some form. Whereas it was somewhat questionable as to whether they were just going to re-release Metal Gear Solid 3 Delta and then give up on it because they would say it didn't sell well enough. The Metal Gear series is a wild and crazy series. But it is a fairly long series too. So I don't know if I'd ever really feel that I had enough time to get into the experience of playing all the old games. And with the Delta version of Metal Gear Solid 3, there still is very much a question as to, are we going to get a Delta version of 1 and 2 and 4 and Peace Walker and all the other games, or are we just going to get re-releases of the games as in their current formats, slight remasters. But yeah, you can see in the graphics here that this definitely looks like an old game, just fairly low polygon. Let's not sit here and watch all of this. Yeah. I guess the next question also to ask, is there a need for Volume 3, or does Volume 2 cover all the games? I'm not sure, because I'm just that unfamiliar with the Metal Gear series. Yeah. In a funny way, you would expect a series like this to either do a full-on reboot and just abridge the story as it's told, or have like a animated recap video. But yeah, if you took all the Metal Gear games and just turned it into some kind of 2-hour long movie, that might work fairly well. That is one of the things that G4, previously known as Tech TV and X-Play, not so much X-Play, but that's one of the things that G4 in particular was doing, is that they were just getting permission to show all the cutscenes of some of these games and letting people who maybe weren't willing to commit to actually playing the games at least have some level of fandom there. There is definitely a argument to say that if you're making a game and a secondary tier of fandom can be sold something, that would be great. So yeah, potentially you get people to watch a movie instead of playing the game or buying the newest Metal Gear game, even if they haven't played the oldest ones. Actually, need to leave that one open. Alright, we probably are close to being done, and it definitely feels like this might be a case where Video Games Chronicle again didn't put out anything because they were just so late on these announcements. 007 First Light Story Mode trailer and screenshots are available on Gematsu if you want to watch that. I don't know if there's too much more to really get hyped about at this point, though. Star Wars Galactic Racer gameplay trailer and screenshots are also available on Gematsu. This is obviously going to be the modern day take on something like a pod racing game, although they're not all pods that are being raced. Again, I don't know if there really is a huge audience these days that are that big of fans of Star Wars that this particularly is going to sell that well. It looks nice. in the screenshots, which really doesn't actually tell you that much. Crafton announces Project Wingless for consoles and PC, including the PS5. This is a game where you play as a big chicken. It's a anthropomorphic humanoid chicken. And I think it's a kind of hack and slash type game. It definitely looks fairly weird, and I don't know why we're starting with a gross bloody hand and some kind of Indian style looking deity. That was the guess. The bird that drinks tears. This might be based on something I'm not familiar with. But yeah. This might be just some kind of Asian story that, as a Westerner, I'm completely unfamiliar with. But yeah, you can see a level of violence, a level of gore, and then you get this weird twist. It's really an example, I think, of where they needed to establish the tone of violence and gore just so the game didn't feel like it was a complete and total joke. Which, even so, it still feels like a complete and total joke as you're playing as this big chicken. It feels visually like a Warriors game in that you're taking on giant amounts of enemies a lot of times, but you're also taking on monsters. This might just very well be an example of where these Asian stories are fairly ridiculous, and there's no way you're really going to get a Western audience to embrace something like this. Tale of the Monkey King, same kind of thing there, where you have an anthropomorphic monkey character. That one has just been done so many times that that people are willing to give it a little bit more of a chance. Although that last monkey game, I think it was called Wushu, I definitely know people, at least one person, that would consistently describe that as monkey souls, just like Dark Souls with the monkeys. So yeah, if Wingless is just chicken souls, Dark Souls with chickens, wouldn't be surprised if half the people playing it are playing it because they think it's silly. Oh, as I scroll here, it is an adaptation of something called The Bird That Drinks Tears, which is a Korean fantasy novel series that first began development in 2022. So even the story here is not actually that traditional or old. Let's see, Shueisha Games and Acquire announced a co-op stealth action game called Yako Shinobi Ops for PS5 and PC. Yako. Interesting word. Doesn't quite feel actually Japanese. So do we really want to watch this full trailer, or can we jump forward here? See a group of people and cutscenes, and the actual game seems to be a stealth game, maybe a stealth co-op game. Yeah. Definitely feels like a game that is smaller in scale. Man, we have so many announcements today. I'm probably just going to want to take another break. By the time we're done with the news, yeah, we go through all the Gematsu news now, and then we'll get some repeats of the same stories from our other sources. Neva Prologue has been announced for the PS4 and 5, the Xbox One and Series, the Switch, and the PC. Which I would assume this is a prequel to the game. Prologue. Standalone downloadable content. Yeah. Well, on Steam, it seems to very much not be standalone. And that you have to have the base game. So yeah. The way the Steam page depicts it, you're not able to just get the prologue and play it. So effectively, it's an added chapter that's a prologue to the game. Mina the Hollower launches this spring. Limited time demo for the PS5 launches February 13th. This was, I believe, another game where it's, yeah, it's more of like an 8-bit Game Boy style. Maybe Zelda game might be a way of describing it. Although it feels like it's probably a little bit more platformy, it's a little bit more fast-paced than any Game Boy Zelda game would have ever been. Yeah. I guess I'll leave it at that. Put this on the follow list and see. I probably didn't put this on the follow list because I never was able to finish playing Shovel Knight, but I might be able to play a game like this. Although I still am not 100% sold on the idea of wanting to play something that looks like a Game Boy game. Rayman 30th Anniversary Edition has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. I'd assume that this includes some, if not all, of the Rayman games. Actually, it may just be the first Rayman game. Beast of Reincarnation launches August 4th. Voyage through ominous landscapes in a post-apocalyptic Japan. This is the one from the Game Freak, the company that has made pretty much all of the Pokemon games, all the mainline Pokemon games up until this point. So yes, it is very surprising to see them do something in 3D and something that potentially looks like it is actually going to be more of a AAA, quadruple A style game, whereas I think Pokemon games at this point are in danger of being closer to AA games just because they don't put that much effort and budget into them. Yep. And this is a weird combination of Okami-like Japanese myths and fighting plant creatures of some sort. Which will make it stand out, although potentially you're going to have a case where maybe the two strong themes of Japanese myth and plant creatures, and looks like some robots too, may not synergize and make a lot of sense in one game, and may just fight each other as a concept, depending on how it's implemented. Moving on, Gothic action adventure RPG Crimson Moon has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Which the screenshots really aren't showing me much here. M for mature. Once again, this is another one of those streams where the only way to really do it properly is to look at the trailers. But to look at the trailers is to commit 3 to 5 minutes on one game, which is way too long in the long run. And I don't really have an idea as far as how to speed up this process. What you might do is have special presentations when these kinds of things happen. Extra episodes, as it were, but yeah, I don't want to be even more inconsistent than I already am. This game looks fine. It definitely feels like you're just doing a hack and slash type Dark Souls type experience, it would be my guess. Though these Demon Soul Dark Souls games do seem like they are moving and evolving to be faster experiences overall. It's less taking a few breaths in between each attack and less need to really prepare yourself before dodging or taking an attack. Let's see. Control Resonant has a gameplay reveal trailer. Just as a weird looking creature. I'm not sure exactly what we're looking at. It looks like a lady or some kind of humanoid monster in some kind of weird, almost straitjacket like outfit with blood on their legs. Let's watch the trailer and see the actual gameplay here. Well, one thing I can say is I've already seen 3 or 4 bosses, which in the first Control game there was really just 2 or 3 bosses throughout the whole experience. And even when you were fighting a boss, it was a lot of fighting these same minions over and over again. It does seem like you have a hover / fly ability. It seems like the world is much more open world and less constrained in a building like the first game. It seems like you can target enemies, then hack and slash them and get resources, and you're just going to be doing a lot of that. The technology to twist a world like that is always a little bit difficult to program, although it's been done enough nowadays that I think people can figure it out. But it definitely was a point 10, maybe 20 years ago where that was in itself a sales point, having the ability to twist the world. A big part of that is like the physics engines would have just always assumed that gravity was downward, and gravity manipulation was not really something that would be included in console in main game physics engines. Although, seeing how much you're twisting around here, this could just become quite a hassle if you are just constantly needing to jump around. It does seem like you are just constantly trying to kill a wide variety of people to get more resources. Yeah. One of the dangers I would say about this reveal trailer is that it may really leave you with the impression that you're not actually going to ever be in different locations, and so you may just spend the entirety in the city in Control Resonant in the same way that you spent the entirety of well, at least most of the first Control game in the first house building. At a point you could get underneath the building for, I think, some DLC. Yeah. So that gives us a better idea of at least what the gameplay is going to be like. Much more fast-paced, perhaps slightly more variety in enemies, a little bit more open world. Moving on, Dead or Alive, new project has been announced for PS5. Dawn of a new chapter awaits. Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja announced a new Dead or Alive, and I think they're firing a shot across the bow by having this much cleavage show up. Like, there has been a level of self-censorship and PlayStation just imposing censorship around the Dead or Alive series, which has always been trying to push the lewdness up fairly high. And the point where they would have developed the Dead or Alive visuals, Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball, has also kind of failed, I think, somewhat to stay around. That being said, it is also worth pointing out that the last Dead or Alive game, I believe it was a Dead or Alive game, had a whole bunch of ladies, who looked basically exactly the same. Maybe they had slightly different colors, but the hip to bust to waist ratio was exactly the same. They all had giant knockers, for lack of a better term, and they definitely were trying to go for a more mature look. They didn't want anybody that was below basically a G cup in the game, and that may still be the case. And going forward, as far as Dead or Alive games, is that you'll just have ridiculously big boob character and then another ridiculously big boob character, which, yes, this character is, when you look at the neckline and the shoulders, this is fairly large and anatomically feels off. Whereas Dead or Alive 6 Last Round shows you some of the older Dead or Alive characters, where you definitely have a little bit more variety in the female forms being presented, and you have some guys, which, in fairness, I would say the guys are not particularly too varied in their forms either. And so this is an older game just being updated to keep people's attention, I would say. Don't think it's really necessary to watch this trailer though. But yeah, 2 announcements from Koei Tecmo for Dead or Alive does definitely point that they are going to go back to making Dead or Alive games, and with the new, relatively new person in charge of Sony, maybe the restraints are smaller. It may also be a case where this is just a direct pushback to censorship from payment processors and censorship in general just growing. It would be not unbelievable if we get some story where the Dead or Alive games are not allowed on Steam or forced to be censored in some way. Which I'm sure the fandom will not be happy about that if that does happen. Moving on, Brigadine Abyss has been announced for modern consoles and PC, due out in 2026. Looks like it's a tactical strategy game, one of the genres I'm often least excited about. And more than likely it is a case where this trailer just doesn't really look anything like what the actual game looks like. Do we have any actual gameplay being shown? Well, a big part of this really does seem to be just showing off menu elements. This is a shorter trailer at 49 seconds. I could have just watched it all. But we'll move on. Legacy of Kain Defiance Remastered has been announced for all consoles and PC. Which I'm not sure which game in the series this really would be. Let's watch the trailer. Looking at the screenshot, this definitely looks like a remastered version of the actual game that existed in the past. But Legacy of Kain in particular is like the first Legacy of Kain game is actually the second game in the story, because there was a game before that that was under a different name. But that game I think also plays fairly different. So it is questionable whether that game would ever actually get remastered and released. It's going to include lost levels and unreleased content. Interesting. Resident Evil Requiem's 4th trailers and screenshots are available if you want to check that out. I don't think it inherently is too necessary. As we see more trailers and screenshots, we're just going to get spoiled more and more on the surprises of what the game is, and there's really probably no reason to really do that. We're starting to see this pupil missing white-haired girl character, for example. Yep. Pragmata's Worldview trailer and screenshots are also available on Gematsu. Interesting. It seems like this probably is a trailer worth watching. We'll watch it in Japanese, I guess. So yeah, up until this point we haven't seen the Pragmata take place on Earth, and there was definitely a lot of thought that they were trying to get to Earth, but maybe that would have been the end of the whole experience, is that they made it to Earth and that was that. And as far as we know, this may just be a simulation of Earth that we're looking at, it definitely looks like there's something that has infected and changed Earth. And yeah, I would heavily lean to assume that this is a hologram and not the real Earth. Pragmata now has a blue V, an upside down V aspect to it. Visually, this looks more interesting than what I've seen of Pragmata up until this point. It looks like we've got perhaps a larger variety of robots we're fighting or running away from, at least, and a lot more variety in what we actually see. But they've already shown you what the gameplay mechanic is almost certainly going to be in this game, so if it's slightly different locations and monsters you're fighting, it still doesn't really touch on a difference in how you're actually going to play. If there is any difference on how you're going to play, it may still be the same gameplay mechanics we've already seen. A game called For Loop has a gameplay deep dive trailer. I don't recognize a game called For Loop, though. Again, this could have been a game that was teased a while ago at like the Video Game Awards, and then I immediately forgot it. And inherently looking at all these trailers now, I may very well forget them again. Yeah, this is the game where the voice over the trailer is just talking about how you're going to die over and over again, and then they're going to resurrect you and try again and again. And it overall just looked like a extraction shooter game. Yeah, I definitely think that's what this is an extraction shooter, although the monsters you're fighting do look fairly different. If I have to play with other people, if there really is no point because it's an extraction shooter and you're just playing over and over again, that convinces me not to have any real interest in this game. Yeah. Good news is we probably are going to see not the death of extraction shooters, but a significant decrease in people trying to make extraction shooter type games, because only really the first or second to market in those kinds of genres tend to succeed, and then you have a lot of other games where people spend a lot of time developing them and then they don't actually end up succeeding, and they've just wasted a bunch of development funds. You've got this giant Rubik's Cube they're shooting. Okay, so we've seen a little bit more For Loop. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach is coming to PC on March 19th. PC features have been detailed. Check out Gamatsu if you want to get to the full details. I thought it already was on PC, personally, but I guess I was wrong. And then Ghost of Yotai free DLC Legends launches March 10th. Which that brings us to the Gaming on Linux articles at this point. A Starship Troopers Ultimate Bug War has a satisfying demo and release date according to Gaming on Linux. This is oddly one not talked about by Matsu. Star Trek Voyager Across the Unknown demo has been upgraded with voiceover. Interesting. Imagine that might help a little bit. The old Unreal adds new installers for Unreal Tournament 2004, Unreal Tournament Game of the Year, and Unreal Gold. Old Unreal, I assume, is a open source project to get old Unreal Tournament games running. Dino Crisis 1 and 2 arrive on Steam, but they need tweaks to run on SteamOS. Apparently, you have to do a workaround using Proton tricks to change a registry. Interesting. So, yeah. That's interesting to show how much work it takes to potentially get this to work on SteamOS and how much, I guess, excitement about Dino Crisis coming out there is, that people have already figured out the solution and are talking about it. Let's see, you can now add hardware details to Steam reviews and give more feedback on Steam Deck Verified. The new Steam Beta update for the desktop and Steam Deck SteamOS allows you to add hardware details for reviews and give more Steam Deck Verified feedback. So you got a pop-up here, I guess, where you can add a new PC configuration. Yeah, apparently you have to save your hardware first, and then feels like maybe there's some other stuff you can mention, which this is kind of good news because that tells us that Valve is interested in getting more detailed feedback, which would imply that there is at least a small contingent of employees at Valve that actually want to act based on that detailed feedback. In particular, I imagine it is also a step towards figuring out the right time to release SteamOS for more hardware, or just hardware in general. Blades of Fire is jumping from Epic to Steam with big upgrades and Steam Deck support with version 2.0. Let's watch the trailer for Blades of Fire and see what it's all about. How long is this trailer going to be? 1:30? Let's skip ahead a little bit. Now, I don't recognize this game, and inherently that is a problem with anything that's going to be an Epic Games Store exclusive, is that maybe I will have seen a trailer for it a year or two ago, but will have pretty well forgotten it if it never showed up on the Steam storefront. In a funny way, this feels like this is somebody else trying to make an old school God of War game. So the timing might turn out to be just awful for them now that there have been announcements for old school God of War games being re-released, at least on the PS5. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that game Too Human that you can't buy anymore. I'm surprised nobody has tried to make a game similar to that also. Not that the gameplay mechanics were particularly good, but to take the general concept of the story and make a game similar to it, where it is a high-tech Valhalla type world, so sci-fi mixed with those Viking myths, I suppose. Blades of Fire is now on Steam. Doesn't have any user reviews. It's single player too, which is kind of interesting. Let's see, more Total War games arrive on Good Old Games, along with a return of The Long Dark, which is interesting. Interesting that The Long Dark would have left Good Old Games in 2018, but is now back. Unfortunately, it seems like Hinterland is the developer. They just announced some layoffs, with the Long Dark sequel taking longer than expected. Let's see, the No Ice in Minnesota charity bundle is live on itch.io. I was wondering if this might get taken down, but apparently not. They're looking to raise $500,000. I don't know what that $500,000 is going to be spent on. It seems like they've already raised $238,575.59. Which, yeah. There's also a fairly long list of games in this bundle. But I'm not sure there are Steam Link games. So, yeah. And frankly, if you're a United States citizen, maybe buying this bundle might be a little dangerous to you. Who knows what happens in the future if people start looking into people's purchase history of the past. Moving on, the Gothic 1 remake gets a June release date. Which, I want to watch this just because I've heard of the game Gothic, but I don't really remember what it is. Seeing that it's a THQ Nordic game does not inherently inspire confidence. Visually, it looks interesting. See, there might very well be a case where playing something like this might fulfill a desire similar to playing Skyrim one more time. Which, yeah, I imagine there was some audience in the past who would have played Skyrim and then moved on to other fantasy games, or played other fantasy games and then moved on to Skyrim, and maybe not moved all the way away from Skyrim. Looking at Gothic here, you're seeing a lot of elements that I suppose are fairly generic, but definitely were solidified in Skyrim, such as underground cities and bandits and caves and things like that. But the way this is shown definitely seems to indicate that the protagonist is much more of a character, and there's much more of a story, probably linear story, being shown and told here. Yeah, the visuals here on this remaster look pretty good. Yeah, you wouldn't convince this for a quadruple A game, but it also looks as good, if not better, than your average fantasy game made by a small indie company. Now, this definitely looks more interesting than I thought it would. My next concern, though, would be that this is not a single player experience. Yeah, this remake is from a remake of a 2001 game, so you're talking 25-year-old game. Well, honestly, not that much really would have changed as far as fantasy games go. Gameplay mechanics, things to make things a little bit easier and faster would have changed, and that's about it. Yeah, that's kind of an exciting trailer. We can see this is already on the fall list, and yes, it is a single player game. So yeah, I would definitely target this as the next fantasy game I should play if I am going to play a fantasy game, which is kind of a big if, but not a huge if. Let's see. Buckshot Roulette Dev has become a major Godot engine donor. The Godot engine team announced that Mike Klubnica, the developer of Buckshot Roulette, and split with periods in between each letter, has become a major funding donor for the open source game engine. They announced that on Blue Sky. I don't know if people really are using Blue Sky much these days, with the potential of people leaving Discord. I don't think they're going to move over to Blue Sky that much either. One would assume the Buckshot Roulette was made in the Godot engine. And yeah, I imagine there's just going to be increasingly successful games and bigger games that are made in the Godot engine and then end up becoming funders or at least contributors to the open source game engine code, which contributors might be more valuable right now than funding is. It doesn't really help the Godot engine perfectly if they just had millions and millions of dollars to develop, but the team that was actually making the open source engine was the same size and could only work at that same speed. We need more game developers in particular to make weirder gameplay mechanics and weirder stuff and contribute that source code back if need be, or make examples of how you can use the Godot engine to do what they're doing. But yeah, right now the examples for Godot engine are very 2D heavy and very much action RPG style games that get a little too dangerously close to looking like RPG Maker style games. Whereas you look at this state of play announcements here being shown for gaming on Linux, and very noticeably, none of the games being shown here are 2D action RPG games. Yes, you have Belmont's Curse, that's a 2D side-scrolling game, but the rest of these are 3D or 2.5D things. Did not see this Kina Scars of Camosa game. Yeah. There was a game called Kina a long time ago. Is this a sequel? Like, I feel like the last game called Kina was like 10 years ago, though. It would be weird. Certainly, but we may just be at that point where being acquired and being laid off by other game companies, a lot of game developers who had projects in mind that they wanted to work on now have the time or freedom to actually make those games, because they are now no longer just a cog in a Microsoft or EA machine to generate the next bit of content for something like Halo. Yeah, I definitely recall there was something called like Kina the Spirits Within, but then no, there was a Final Fantasy called Final Fantasy the Spirits Within. If I had more time, I'd actually do some research here and see if I could find something called Kina as far as a video game goes. But yeah, the look here definitely feels familiar. So it would be very weird if it turns out I'm just dreaming this up. And there was no game called Kinna before. And that is a great example of just kind of the names you need these days, where you want like a shorthand title, but then you need something longer to distinguish your game for the years to come, because something called Kinna is just going to be too short. But yeah, as we scroll down here, Rayman 30th Anniversary Edition is 2D. But yeah, the rest of these, maybe this is 2D, I don't remember. I don't think it actually is. Lots and lots of 3D. And yeah, it would be fairly difficult to make any of these games in the Godot engine without putting a lot of effort into it. I don't think I've ever seen a Godot engine fighting game. 2.5D platforming game would be pretty easy. Open world 3D fighting game might be a little hard. Belmont's Curse, probably fairly easy to do. Extraction shooters and networking things might be a little bit harder. And something heavily cinematic like Death Stranding 2, with its gameplay mechanics of shipping and carrying things, might be somewhat hard to do. Yep. Control Resonant, we already have looked at. Death Stranding 2, put it on the follow list. Crimson Moon, yeah, that's perhaps one of the most generic ones we saw. Let's see, how many dudes does it take to beat one horse-sized duck and 75 duck-sized horses? This game answers your dumb questions. Is that the actual name of the trailer of the game? I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, it does seem different, to say the least, as far as a title. Yeah, it's just called How Many Dudes. And it looks like it is a fighting simulator game, for lack of a better term. Interesting. I imagine a lot of people will play that because it's like streamer bait type gameplay, and then they'll get bored of it fairly quickly. See, I'm thinking that this Legacy of Kain Defiance Remastered may just be the first Legacy of Kain games. They're not really telling me in the story as far as whether this is a sequel to something or not. Yeah, and I think it probably is a sequel to something, just because it has Defiance in the name, then remastered. Let's see, moving on. Linux Mint may slow down releases to have more development time, along with receiving an unprecedented amount of donations recently. The Linux Mint team is looking to slow down the release cycle. Okay. It's kind of hard to recommend Linux Mint at this point. I just don't think in the long run Mint has gained enough audience share that there's a reason to stick with it over some of the other distros available. Let's see, Beast Reincarnation. Diablo 2 Resurrected Inferno Edition gets released on Steam and is Steam Deck verified. We talked about that quite a bit. The only annoying part I really find here is that you can't play Diablo 1. And really would like to play Diablo 1 before playing Diablo 2 on Steam. You can see Silent Hill Townfall. Sorry, on the follow list. And looks like we've got a lot of duplicate tabs at the moment. So I'm just going to reload these and assume. Yeah, I mentioned this before. Steam Deck is completely out of stock in the United States, Canada, and Asia. So I'm not sure it is in stock anywhere around the world. UK, it's still in stock. So Europe, it also seems to be in stock. So there's a few more you can get, but I mean, you basically have to have somebody in the UK or Europe buy it for you and ship it to you, which would make it very much more expensive. In a funny way, this might be a great way for Valve to say, unfortunately, we don't have any of the parts for the Steam Deck as it is, so we're going to make a Steam Deck 2 faster than we thought we would. But you still run into the RAM shortage issue, certainly. I don't know what else to really say. I suggested and recommended people getting a Steam Deck for probably 2-3 years now. If you didn't get one by now, you're out of luck. And you may be out of luck as far as any kind of PC gaming, and this may very well hurt what was a growing market of PC gamers, where definitely felt like with the Steam Machine and the Steam Deck we were going to see more people choose to be PC gamers first and not bother with having Xboxes or PlayStations. Probably still occasionally some people buying Nintendo systems for the Nintendo exclusives. Moving on, the new Proton experimental update adds controller support to more launchers on Linux and SteamOS. Okay. That is nice to see. Apparently they also fixed Batman Arkham Asylum Game of the Year edition in some way. Mesa 26.0 is out, bringing ray tracing performance improvements for the AMD Ryzen graphics driver, which is nice, I suppose. Nice to see improvements keep on going. No Man's Sky Remnant update brings a fancy gravity gun and customizable trucks. It is funny how you would go full circle here and adding gravity guns when that's what Halo, Half-Life as a series was all about. As far as Half-Life 1 was the Valve source engine using being able to create gravity with a gravity gun. Of course, I wasn't really expecting No Man's Sky to have a gravity gun in particular, ever. No Man's Sky still doing very, very well. Overwatch has returned with new heroes and a new UI. Pretty much have talked about that already. That being said, in the last 3 days, Overwatch is mixed at 55%, which is actually a massive improvement for its overall reviews at 27%. Now, this was originally called Overwatch 2, and they have just changed the page to label it as Overwatch 1, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, they still would have to improve it quite a bit, which the number of 24-hour peak players, though, does show a level of interest going on here. That'll bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Let's see, a magical mayhem simulator Yap Yap hits 500,000 in sales. Never heard of this. It's a magic-themed co-op horror title from Mason Bat. It's weird to have GameDeveloper.com talk about the sales numbers of any specific game. They tend not to really do that too much. Let's see. Ubisoft says its creative house leadership will include respected external hires. The company's first creative house leadership appointment includes Charlie Guillemot, the son of Ubisoft's boss Yves Guillemot. Which, yeah, definitely feels like there's nepotism going on here quite a bit. And yeah, that definitely seems like that is just what is going to keep on happening at Ubisoft until something changes, if something ever changes. There's an update here. 10 Chambers co-founders have been laid off amid a significant restructuring. The GTFO developer says it's reorganizing to ensure upcoming shooter Den of Wolves is primed for success. The update here says 10 Chambers has cut a number of roles as part of a significant restructuring that impacted several of the studio's co-founders. It is interesting, certainly, to see high-level management get laid off. When in reality it usually is the high-level management that is more likely to be, not likely, but more deserving of being laid off, I guess is the right way to phrase it. Usually it is upper management that is accomplishing almost nothing. Let's see, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 surpasses 5 million sales within its first year. The 10 Chambers co-founder departs after a decade. We now know they were laid off, I guess. Hinterland confirms layoffs after the delay of the Long Dark sequel. More news of layoffs and more news of layoffs still happening a lot. Analysis on Ubisoft's cost cutting and the myth of sustainable growth. This looks like this is more of an editorial. The economy is in shambles and these companies are still talking about sustaining growth instead of sustaining their business. Yeah. There's an update here that Wildlight Entertainment confirms layoffs 2 weeks after Highguard launch. I don't even recognize Highguard as a game. I've already forgotten about it, I think. Here's that story I was talking about. Blizzard agrees to redesign Overwatch's hero's appearance after Backlash. The voice actor behind Aaron, he was the voice actor in particular, I think, that probably put it over the line. Expressed disappointment over the change of the character's designs between promotional materials and her launch in game. And yeah, they apparently want her to look closer to the promo materials, which had her looking older. Fans were calling it the same face syndrome, pointing out that the character designs in Overwatch, especially for East Asian women characters, has gotten homogeneous, or homogeneous, however you want to pronounce that. Yeah. Definitely one of my sources tended pin this on Western fans, not Eastern fans, but not sure if I fully believe that. Homogeny and sameness in appearance is going to be a problem regardless. It is interesting that they are concerned about the face of the character so much when you would generally assume that there might be other aspects that are also being discussed, but apparently those are not getting discussed or they're not getting reported on. This might very well be a case too where the conversation was actually very small, but even the smallest amount of backlash is something Blizzard cannot afford these days. Alright, well, I suppose that would bring us to all the games on Steam, but before I start with that, let's take another break because yeah, this is going to be long and I could use it. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So, unless we run into any Video Games Chronicle articles, I think what we're going to find is that um, that we will be just going through all the new games that come out on Steam. So again, what we're looking for today is to see if we see slightly better quality of games now that we're getting more announcements and games are even coming out. Again, the rules that I apply here are if I'm interested in the game, I'll put it on the follow list, even slightly interested, and then I will swipe to the right to leave it open to make it a YouTube short. If I am completely uninterested in it, I will swipe down. If I'm still feel like it deserves a YouTube short, I'll swipe to the right and not put it on the follow list. And that's generally what I'm doing to apply decisions. It is not so much quite what I'm doing to make decisions. First person shooter with a rear view mirror. Interesting concept, although probably not that interesting to implement. Yeah, as far as how I make decisions, that is way more of a feeling it out type experience where I just kind of know what grabs me visually in the screenshots and what I am not interested in. For instance, something like this visual novel is probably not something that I really would want to play because it's probably super simplistic and has AI in it. Yeah. Which the amount of usage of AI is increasingly happening. And then who knows, I'm not even really checking to see if something that is more 3D like is actually using AI. I'm only checking for AI in things that have absolute 2D anime style appearance. Now this is disappointing. We're going to have to check into this. This Rayman 30th Anniversary Edition is 50% positive already. I wonder if it just plays terrible. I wouldn't be surprised if these games actually play pretty terrible in their original forms on original hardware. It definitely was the case that there were more platformers in the 8 and 16-bit era that really were just almost impossible to control than there were good ones. The missing original soundtrack and the new music on loop stinks. I haven't heard everything, but even a half an hour of playing, a number of the songs almost nothing like the original. So this one's about the soundtrack. It is far inferior to the fan-made Rayman Redemption experience, but it also ditches the original soundtrack, and replaces it with reimagined versions without giving the player the choice to switch back to the OG music. I would have to assume that there was a licensing issue here. And that's one of the problems with the laws in the United States is that you just cannot license music in perpetuity, either the performance or the composition, but you have to kind of license both. So half of these complaints are about the soundtrack, and even the positive ones are about Linux issues and soundtracks more than anything. So they should have shown something like this to fans and gotten that feedback, but maybe there was just nothing they could do about it. But then at a certain point it then becomes the question is it even worth putting out the game if half your audience is going to be pissed off by it? And this is a Ubisoft release in particular, so that might give some more information. Here we have another visual novel that feels very much like it is AI, doesn't even support English. It's only French. Yeah. I suppose that is one thing where I could probably be very picky and save myself some time and just have AI games automatically close and not even give them a chance. But then at a certain point, am I really speaking to the reality of the games that are coming out on Steam, or am I just curating to the point where I'm showing only a small subsection of games that are coming out on Steam? I'm already doing that because of YouTube censorship reasons and not showing the adult games. High on Life 2, also mixed reviewed, not doing well. Some of these games, I guess, got announced and then got released within the matter of a couple days. But yeah, I suppose that might save me some time. This looks like a horror game, but I question if it isn't also AI generated. Yeah. Yeah. If they're saying some of it's AI generated, there's really no reason not to believe that more of what they're admitting is AI generated. Now, what's funny here is that I think these are animated characters, but this might just be live action characters. I guess they might be live action characters with just a weird amount of lighting and makeup applied to them. This definitely feels like a dating sim that probably would be better if it was in the adult section. It too, it has AI generated content in it. Yeah. And at what point does the dam break if I was to filter out AI generated stuff? Like, that would be the question. If all of a sudden, instead of looking at potentially 100 games every live stream, we're looking at 10, doesn't that create a weird situation? Reanimal, also 50% positive already. Let's see if we can see a reason why. It's very good, but very short, especially at this price. My playtime even includes wandering off for a sandwich and going to the bathroom for 5 hours. 3 hours long. Yeah, so just an incredibly short game, wanting $40. Yeah. That's not something I'd be willing to endorse. Some of these games intentionally, I think, are trying to push the argument of head tracker. Seems like it doesn't work either. They're trying to push the argument that short games deserve way more money than they are getting. A lot of German reviews here in the negative for this application. Yeah. 3-hour game, more than $5 to me does not seem like a value I would be willing to engage with, let alone $40 for 3 hours of gameplay. That is an insane price. Honestly, I don't know what to do if I was a game developer and I've put like way too much time and effort into developing a game, and I've got a publisher that's giving me way too much money, and all of a sudden when it gets to a point where the game has to come out and be sold, and I know it's super short, but then the publisher is forcing effectively the price to be way higher than what is reasonable. I don't know what you can do there. I think at some level this is a marijuana based card game, haven't seen that before. At some level I guess you have to beg and plead for forgiveness, or hope. Goblins 6. Is this... There was a series called Goblins many years ago. Is this like a new game in that series? Is this a re-release? I don't know. It's intriguing. Seems like they've remade some of the art in widescreen. But at some level, it also feels like it might just be a hidden object game, but it's not labeled that way. It's labeled as a point-and-click adventure. Almost want to see it in its trailer. So it is a point-and-click adventure, but it feels like there's just probably a lot of animation and a lot of characters going around. The real question would really come down to, are there any other Goblins games? Currently the English version is almost entirely in French with a few English lines here and there. I assume this must be a bug. Interesting. Yeah, it definitely would be a question as far as, can you get Goblins 1 through 5, or is that just a really old series that you really can't play? We are seeing kind of a higher number of visual novels today than we have in the past couple days, and I wouldn't particularly say that we're seeing like a lot of high quality games. Just looking at these games based on their screenshots. Gonna give this one a chance because it looks like it might be a little bit different. Still very much is the case that there is a lack of variety. Yeah. This is some kind of weird Russian game in clay. I like the clay idea, but the rest of it looks like nothing. But yeah, there is just a general lack of variety that still happens in games. The way things are depicted, the themes of fantasy. Yeah. And I suspect that might even go to the realm of books. in particular, in that the different genres of books that are available to read and that people actually do read are still fairly too similar, leaning too heavily on recognizable cultural touchstones instead of perhaps being wilder and crazier things. Yeah, may very well be the case that both for books and games, there's too many references and not enough of a starting point from a reference that is then spinning off into its own thing. It's just, I'm doing the same thing that everybody else is doing type design. I saw a YouTube video talking about, I think it's called 11/22/48. It's the day JFK was assassinated, is the name of the Stephen King book that was turned into a TV series. And I watched that TV series, and then I watched someone recap it, and I didn't remember half of that was being described, or a lot of it I think went over my head, and I didn't understand the concept of time itself not wanting to be changed as a horror element, as a villain. But yeah, the idea of a disembodied entity of time is something slightly different. Yeah. Stephen King, I suppose, is one of the writers that, for the most part, does tend to do something slightly different when he tells a story. Even if it doesn't always work out. I think maybe part of that is just prompting too, in that I don't know how many people are taught to write at all, let alone taught to write using writing prompts, where there might just be some random words put together and you have to struggle more to figure out the story you're telling. I don't know what's happened here on these screenshots, but something is causing the right arrow to disappear at times fairly consistently. It's probably my code messing with it. Almost certainly. Buggy code. I feel like, particularly in game development, you also have the homogeny, the sameness, in part because there's just so much asset flipping going on, for lack of a better term. There's an interesting VR game where you're not fighting the anime girl, you're scrubbing the people. Weird, to say the least. At least it's something different, you would say. At least I can say that much. It's something different. And we have something called Neon Curves that feels like it's probably asset flippy or AI. Let's go down and see. Well, there's no claim of AI being used. But then also the mature content warning is not actually in the mature content section. there is something to say about racing games that they probably should have some human mascot type characters. I'll give this a chance. It's rated very positively, so it seems like somebody is enjoying it. I'm glad we don't see too many of these match 3 games, because yeah, there definitely could be a massive amount of them. We are still seeing a fairly high amount of non-English games. Give that a chance too. Killer Inn is mixed reviewed at 51%. Just go ahead and take that off the follow list. Rogue Point is, I assume, more online co-op focused, though it's tagged as a single player game. Yeah. Writing prompts might be very helpful for game developers, but then if you got like a writing prompt to have a character that was, say, a sentient, let's think of something really weird, copper ore, for instance, not just a sentient rock, but a bar of copper ore that was sentient, you would be very limited in people who have animated a sentient piece of copper ore. Almost certainly you would find only a couple instances at most. Gonna give this a chance. Whereas if you just wanted an average human looking character, you're gonna have the pick of the litter there as far as assets you can flip. What really sucks about the asset flippers, though, I would say more than anything, is that they're not even particularly good at programming. So it's not a case that they've got an amazingly good gameplay design and they just are bad at animation and also bad at finding animators to animate for them. It's also that they don't have a good gameplay concept or the ability to program things. This one is positive, so I'll go ahead and put that on the wish list. I suppose it is also worth pointing out that if there was a very uniquely different style of game on Steam, the screenshots might not do it justice. Yeah, something like this could be fairly different. I don't think it is, but it may not translate visually. Yeah. How many more games do we think we have at this point? Probably a dozen or so. I'm probably being too generous. Still really not trying to clean up the fault list at all. I could have sworn there already was a Kitty Powers matchmaker game on Steam. This is the remastered version of it. Okay. I see what's going on here. So a remaster of a game that probably is close to 10 years old. That being said, I'm not sure if you really needed that. Yeah, it's 11 years old, and you look at the animation style here, and then you look at the animation style here, and it looks exactly the same. So yeah, questionable. It's also very questionable as far as Kitty Powers actually being a relevant character, or even somebody that's recognizable by most gamers. Yeah. I suppose for this week, or if I had infinite time and energy and ability, I might try to take that concept. If I had all of this, I might have tried to take the concept of better animating a poker game using probably Godot for Steam. Something that where the aspects of playing poker is depicted in a much more video game form instead of just showing cards, where card games in general are an analogy to a hopefully larger thing that you could imagine, although I doubt many people actually do that. But yeah, cards are an allegory, so in a video game form there's definitely reasons to break out of the card element. This looks like a fairly nice looking live action horror game. It's rated very positively too. That is a weirder thought, certainly. Something I probably should experiment with too, is just to see if I played any of the many live action games I already have, would the YouTube algorithm see those people, those human beings, and decide to make better thumbnails and give more impressions to those videos. There's a decent thought to think it would. This is already mixed, so I'm gonna take it off. Interesting. Fighting in the snow animation. You know, yeah, while I am putting myself in a holding position as far as not playing the games, it wouldn't be the worst idea ever to try and do some faultless cleanup. That is a couple hours at most of work where you're not committing to a ton more. This was that game we looked at that probably won't be anything. Fugitive free rider stands out differently, but probably is AI. It doesn't say it's AI. Yeah, I'll definitely say that it feels like this week has not shown any evidence that when you start to get more of the AA, AAA, quadruple A games released, that leads to that big of a change of what gets released on Steam in general. Maybe a 1 to 5% improvement at most, maybe no change at all, or a change that is just so within the margin of error that you wouldn't be able to accurately tell. I think that is definitely where we are. It's just too much in the margin of error. I'm always looking for something new, something amazing. Well, people are really liking this Fantasista Asuka, which I feel like they changed the thumbnail here and they just have even more anime girls being shown now with this game that has clothing destruction on it. Although I don't know how lewd it really gets. Yeah, it definitely doesn't feel like too much changes. Yeah, basically it feels like there are two classes of games. There are the I've got a publisher, I'm a AAA, quadruple A game, and I'm going to come out and people are going to have seen commercials and trailers for my game and will be hyped about it and will wishlist it and buy it in large amounts. And then there's just everybody else. There's the 1%, and then there's the 99%. As far as game developers go, very positive that Star Sand Island is. Guess I'll go ahead and put it on the wish list, although I don't really think I'd actually play that game. Yeah. The 99% of games coming out on Steam are fighting for scraps and fighting for people's attention. They are not getting promoted or put on the front page, and if you don't make it to the front page on Steam, it feels like you almost certainly aren't even going to matter or succeed. Yeah. And it's certainly difficult to get on the front page. You have to be either a new or trending sale game or most wishlisted game, or the community has to be recommending your game. Or somebody at Valve in particular has to enjoy your game and want to promote it quite a bit. Actually didn't take that long. Let's just scroll down here quickly, see if there's any more follow list cleanup I really want to do. Do you think this Darwin's paradox is going to stand out just by being weird? Yeah, I don't think there's anything else here that I really care about, though. Yep, and that's the end of the show. Again, Video Games Chronicle seemed to have no news. And weirdly, we didn't see the Pokemon Pinball table. Probably by Monday, we'll have somebody cover the Pokemon Pinball table. Video Games Chronicle, most likely. But I think we covered everything else that would be even slightly related to video games. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.